Welcome to the RotoWire Prospect Podcast. I'm your host, James Anderson. The podcast is brought to you by Pick 6, the new fantasy game from DraftKings. Use code RWPICKS for $50 in Pick 6 credits with a $5 deposit. My guest this week is my buddy Chris Clegg of the Dynasty Dugout. You should be familiar with Chris's work. Just one of the best out there. Great guy. Really good content over at the Dynasty Dugout, so definitely recommend supporting Chris's work if you don't already. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about 12 prospects that we think could offer fantasy value in 2025, and we'll probably be kind of having a wide array of different prospects here. I think a lot of my focus will be on guys that I might be drafting in NFBC draft champions, 50-round draft and hold type of thing. But this could also be used for like keeping or final keeper decisions in your keeper leagues or dynasty leagues. So just a dozen prospects that we think will be heard from in 2025. Chris, I really appreciate you joining me. And I'm going to have you start it off with a starting pitcher that you are really bullish on for 2025.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me. Always good to chat with you. Good to be on the pod, and looking forward. You should be in Arizona, right, in a couple of weeks?
Absolutely.
Nice. Looking forward to that. It's countdown's on. Minor league season's wrapping up, and fall league's here. So end of next month, we'll be out in Arizona. So can't wait for that. But yeah, it's going to be a good show. Let's go ahead and start it off. I will start. There's several good pitcher options, I'll say. I think there's quite a few pitching prospects you could draft and feel good about making an impact in 2025. I took Andrew Painter, who he hadn't pitched in quite some time, in 2 years now. So it's been a while. But I do think that Painter will be back and ready to go next year. We saw he was on the cusp of breaking camp as a 19-year-old with the Phillies, just to show you what kind of talent level this is. And sadly, had the UCL injury, had TJ, didn't pitch in 2023. Didn't pitch this year. He's back doing mound work. I know there's some speculation he may be in the fall league that we just talked about. So we'll get some looks, hopefully, to see what kind of shape he's in. But right now, I think Painter's kind of an afterthought, where it's probably one of those things where you draft early. Like if you do an early DC, you get a really good discount on him. You see him in fall league, you see him in spring training, everything looks good. The cost is going to soar because people remember what kind of upside there is. I mean, back in 2022, fastball averaged 97 with really good life, missed a ton of bats. He has a pretty elite slider with good sweeping action, good spin on it, good deception, has a changeup, curve, cutter. It's a true 5-pitch mix here. The question is, we obviously don't know what Painter looks like coming back off a 2-year layoff with Tommy John. Usually somebody like this, that's this young, it doesn't affect them, but you never know. You never know what the return looks like. Hopefully he can bounce back to even just being like 90% of what we saw, because if he does, then I think he's a solid SP2. I think there's a lot of upside here that you could look at, and the cost right now is probably cheap enough. And it was kind of one of those things where I was kind of pushing him as a buy for Dynasty over the last month or two, just because the value was there, the cost had been depleted. And again, if you draft early for redraft in 2025, I think Painter you get a nice discount on. Who knows kind of the path he goes, but there's always a chance he just starts in the rotation next year.
Yeah, that's a really fun name to throw out there. As you mentioned, it's a full 2 seasons since we saw Painter, but I think it's a testament to just how awesome of a pitching prospect he was at the time of his initial injury when he was looking to break camp a couple of years ago, like you said. He was one of the best pitching prospects that has come around in, I would say, like 5 years or so. So he's a really special talent, and I think that's a really good call. Like, we don't exactly know how the next few months are going to play out in terms of news about Painter, and are we going to get video? Is he going to be in the AFL? There's different things that could happen that would lead to his price ticking up a little bit. So I like that idea of, the initial buying window, probably, as you said earlier, this season. But I would say in draft and hold formats, it'll get going here in under a month. That'll probably be the best time to buy Painter, unless he suffers a setback, of course. But yeah, I mean, he's elite. Where is he your top pitching prospect or top 3, or where do you have him overall?
Yeah, he's in that top tier. I've kind of flip-flopped back and forth with him, Job, and Schultz, but at the end of the day, I've kind of just settled on having them all in that kind of top tier.
Okay. Well, I've got him in that top tier as well. My pick is a guy that you didn't mention who is in that tier with those 3 to me, and that's Bubba Chandler of the Pirates. Obviously we saw what Jared Jones did this year in spring training, winning a job. We saw what Paul Skeens did this year. To me, Bubba Chandler is, kind of in between those two in terms of how excited I was for those two last year. Jones was fantastic, but he was only a year really removed from having command that didn't really belong in the rotation. Bit more undersized too. Chandler is just, he kind of checks all the boxes for me. I love the athleticism. I love how he's kind of, slowly sort of filled out his frame and just really become a power pitcher. And he's been going really deep into his starts at AAA. I think if the Pirates had anything to play for, we probably would have already seen Chandler up in the big leagues. I expect them to really put their best foot forward next year. And I think that probably involves Chandler strongly competing for a rotation spot in camp. And so, the worst time to buy Chandler, like if you remember, like Jared Jones, like the price just kind of really skyrocketed once it became apparent that there was a chance he would break camp in the rotation. I think the same thing will happen with Chandler. So I don't exactly know where the price settles in these early DCs, because he is a guy that I think redraft players have sort of heard of. But I do think, like, if you just kind of are like, I'm going to try to be patient with a guy like Bubba Chandler in my first draft and hold. I don't want to use it like a top 30 round pick or anything like that on him. But I do believe that the vast majority, if not all of his innings next year will come in the big league rotation.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there. And I think that he's certainly pushing that elite territory of pitching prospects for me. I mean, the stuff is just off the charts, and he's made a pretty substantial command jump too. The strike throwing that's been a big thing. Saw him a couple times last year live, and it was a Jones, like you said, Jones case where he was kind of all over the place at times, but that command control took a step forward, and he looks ready to go for sure. So 2 great names definitely to target.
Yeah, those are blue chip prospects. Andrew Painter with the Phillies, Bubba Chandler with the Pirates. Now we get into the really fun stuff. We're each going to throw out a relief pitching prospect here that could provide value next year, and it's a dangerous kind of subset of prospects to play with. But sometimes you get a Justin Martinez, or there've been guys that have popped up this year that were people we would have talked about a year ago. Ben Joyce, obviously he's injured right now, but there are going to be relief pitching prospects heard from next year. Chris, you got one that you're particularly interested in?
Yeah, this one actually just recently made his debut, and that's Andrew Walters with the Guardians. Obviously, that's a really good bullpen. You've got Emmanuel Clase, who is going to be around for the next couple of years, and he's the top end closer. But you never know what happens. Obviously, we don't want to wish an injury on a closer like that, but if he were to go down, I think a guy like Andrew Walters could step in pretty immediately and fill that void. Usually we don't see pure relievers get drafted as high as he did, and he went 62nd overall last year out of the University of Miami. Really big stuff. It's a big fastball, 96, 97, top out near triple digits with big ride. It's a tough release point. Just the angle that he creates is really tough. He gets a lot of whiff on the fastball, which is encouraging. And he'll dump you a slider in on you with a lot of swing and miss there. It's a mid-80s pitch. In the minors, he's still on a split finger. We hadn't seen a ton of that this year in the majors, but again, he's only pitched 4 games so far in the majors. He's been pretty good. Has not allowed a run in 4 games in his major league debut, has 3 strikeouts. But just kind of look at the product, and even since back in his days in Miami, it was just utter dominance of that closer role. And I think that he's the type of arm that could step in and make the impact. Whether it's in the closer role or not, that's kind of the tough thing to say. obviously given that Emmanuel Clase is elite. But I do think that Walters has that potential where he's going to pitch at the back of the bullpen really soon and make the kind of impact that you want. I mean, you just look across the board and the whiff rates are there. He doesn't allow a lot of hard contact. It's big extension, good 3-pitch mix. The control command is hit or miss. But again, I think that the pure stuff is going to play with Andrew Walters. Kind of excited to see him already make his debut just a little over a year after being drafted. And I think that certainly in a saves and holds type league, this is a arm that you want now because he's going to make that impact next year with good ratio, strikeouts and holds. And then you never know, you could luck into some saves as well. But if you're looking at a relief prospects, it's always tough to kind of gauge what happens. And obviously you probably want to shop in bullpens that don't have an Emmanuel Clase, but I think just the pure pitcher in Andrew Walters is somebody that I want, and you can probably get him late enough where it's not going to cost you very much.
Yeah, great call there. Coming into the year, Franco Ailman was the Guardians reliever I was highest on, but he had sort of he dealt with some injuries, wasn't quite as dominant as he was last year. I think Walters certainly passed him, obviously came to the big leagues, and so it's just a matter of how the Class A thing plays out. I'm sure the Guardians will eventually trade him. Who knows when that'll be? As you said, injuries could strike, and if that happens, I think Walters is well positioned. I'm going to go with a kind of a more volatile option than Walters, but someone who is coming up in an organization where I think the ninth inning is more up for grabs, and that is Zach Maxwell of the Reds. Alexis Diaz, he's still walking as many batters as he was last year, but he's striking out fewer this year. Hasn't really lost the job, but I don't think he's not the type of guy that I think would be closing on a team that was pushing for the postseason. And Maxwell has a lot of the same flaws that Diaz does, where it's just sometimes he has no idea where it's going. But I do think he's similar to like a guy like Justin Martinez a year ago, where it's just, mammoth fastball, regularly touches 102 with the fastball. Maxwell, to me, really kind of cuts the figure of a closer as well. He's just a really intimidating presence up there on the mound. So maybe the control is never quite good enough for the ninth inning, but he got to AAA this year. The walks have remained fairly high, but he has had stretches this year where he's kept the walks in check. And he has improved, I think, a little bit from a command standpoint from a year ago. So maybe Maxwell doesn't break camp in the Reds bullpen, but I could see a scenario where come June, July, something like that, he's in the mix for saves there in Cincinnati.
Good call. Yeah. I liked Maxwell a lot. Saw him last year in the AFL, and just a big sturdy frame and really dominant. And the fastball was obviously electric, and really gets you with that slider too. So yeah, I'm excited about Maxwell. I think that's probably the better opportunity for saves, having that path. So those are definitely two good options to consider.
One other guy I wanted to just throw out there, since he is in the big leagues right now, is Jaden Hill with the Rockies. This is the year of like the Rockies pitching prospect is kind of like making a comeback, but it's not just Chase Dolander. Obviously they've got some like softer tossing starters, but Jaden Hill, I think, is maybe a top 10 relief pitching prospect in the game. He just happens to be with the Rockies. And then they've also got Zach Agnos, who's an interesting reliever, but I know that Victor Vodnik has been good, better than expected probably this season, but Jaden Hill has a really dominant sinker that generates a ton of ground balls. So I think there's a chance he could be getting saves in Colorado at some point next year as well. Okay. If you like videos like this one, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel and give us a like on this video. Did you ever play the over-under game with your friends? Think I can eat that slice of pizza in under 30 seconds, or I know it'll take you over a minute to down that 2-liter. If you have, then you're going to love Pick 6, the new fantasy game from DraftKings. Here's how to play during baseball season. Pick between 2 and 6 players and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat like runs, hits, strikeouts, and more. Track your picks and play against others for a shot to win huge cash prizes. That's all there is to it. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app and use code RWPicks. New customers play $5 and get 50 in Pick 6 credits. That's code RWPicks for new customers. Play $5 and get 50 in Pick 6 credits. Only on DraftKings Pick 6. The crown is yours. One per new customer. Non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits expire in 6 months. Limited time offer. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 18 plus in most eligible states. Not available in all states, including New York and Connecticut. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos. All right, we're back with Chris Clegg of the Dynasty Dugout, and we are going to give you 12 prospects in this episode to target for 2025. We've already done starting pitchers and relief pitchers, so now we get to close out with the hitters. Chris, catcher remains a deep prospect position. I think there's a lot of different ways you could go here, but who's a catching prospect that you have your eye on for 2025 value?
Yeah, I actually think I've got more catchers in my top 100 than ever.
Yeah, I mean, I could pick like 5 guys for this answer.
Yeah, there's a lot of options and a lot of ways you can go, but yeah, I went with Dalton Rushing of the Dodgers. Yeah, they brought him up to AAA. He's getting work in the outfield, which is actually something that's a little encouraging to me because that tells me that they want his bat in the lineup as soon as possible. So I look at the situation. Obviously, Will Smith is here for the long term. He's not going anywhere. But I think Rushing can catch enough and play the outfield the other games where he probably benefits pretty significantly from a plate appearance standpoint, where it's not just a pure split. I think that there's a good avenue for his bat to be in this lineup pretty regularly. And we know the bat's going to play. Rushing has been elite pretty much his entire career. He backed up Henry Davis at Louisville, so there wasn't a lot on him until his junior year, and he broke out, hit 23 home runs during that junior season, obviously allowing him to be selected in the second round by the Dodgers. And since then, he's just hit at every stop. And this year has been no exception. He's up to 24 homers, 21 doubles with a 270, 384, 505 slash. All the underlying data is just extremely strong on Rushing and has been since he debuted. I mean, he hits the ball incredibly hard. The 9th percentile exit velocity is upper tier, around 106 miles an hour this year. He rarely swings and misses, and he doesn't chase. So it's a chase rate below 20%, which you like to see. That certainly plays if you're in an OBP league, but also he makes enough contact where I think he's going to put up a respectable batting average as well. When he puts the ball in play, I mean, it's elite quality of contact. Gets the ball in the air often, pulls the ball. I think Rushing can be a 20, 25 home run bat pretty regularly with catcher eligibility. I think that's pretty substantial. Factor in that he may get a little more playing time in left field. I think that's helpful for his value too. And obviously that lineup's going to be really, really good for counting stats. I think Rushing at this point is my top catching prospect. Yes. Well, but beside Basayo's ahead of him. I think you could go Basayo too. I think he could debut, but I think Rushing's path is right there. And I think he's more than ready to take major league at bats and make an impact. So I think that he makes a pretty sizable impact in 2025.
Yeah. Rushing was going to be my top pick at catcher as well. I'm getting a little frustrated that maybe the price won't be as affordable as I was hoping. I mean, that is a big thing I'm looking for with the prospects we're talking about on this episode, Chris, is just like, is the value going to be right in drafts to take these guys? And I like Rushing enough that in a draft and hold, like if I really waited on second catcher, I'd be okay just, maybe grabbing a couple catchers with Rushing being one of them. I think he breaks camp with the team next year. Yeah. It just is lining up that way. Why wouldn't they? And Will Smith, this has been Will Smith's least productive year in a bit. So, 120 games for him already this year, 510 plate appearances. I don't think it'd be a bad idea to maybe spell him a little bit more during the regular season with Rushing there. And like you said, I think 90% of his starts at AAA have been in left field. So I think, do you think we see him in time for the postseason this year, or do you think we don't see him at all until next year?
Yeah, I was kind of wondering. I felt like the the move to AAA in the outfield gave a little bit of signal they wanted to call him up this year. But at this point, I don't know. It's probably a coin flip whether we see him or not.
Yeah. That's an interesting one to keep tabs on. I mean, I think he could help him. Like you said, I mean, he's hard hit rates up, strikeout rates down, contact rates up compared to last year, and obviously made his AAA debut this year. So yeah, just love Rushing, and he is, he's not one of these guys where we have to be worried about him like losing the catcher eligibility. Like he's a guy that's going to just keep that. Even if he is playing a decent amount in the outfield, he's not a guy they're ever going to like move out completely from behind the dish. So love Rushing for next year. I'm just interested to sort of see where the cost settles on him. Definitely don't want to have to use a top 30 round pick on him, and going to try to kind of push that off as long as possible, but we might get there at some point. That leaves me with Edgar Quero of the White Sox. Clearly their catcher of the future in Chicago. And I think a guy that we also, I think we might still see Rushing, but I think we certainly would have seen Quero if he hadn't gotten injured. Arm Layton was on the pod a few weeks ago. He noted that he mentioned a mechanical adjustment with Rushing earlier in the season. He's just been, before getting injured, he's just on a total heater. Had a 313, or no, he hit a 344, 424, 550 with 9 home runs and a strikeout rate under 15% in his final 53 games of the season. So I think Quero, like, you love the bat to ball ability, you love the path to playing time, and he really found a new level as a power hitter this year that you could have projected, but he actually kind of put it into games this season. So Quero, I mean, he's going to be up on opening day next year. There's no reason for him to not be. He'll be on all the necessary prospect rankings to get the prospect promotion incentive pick. So yeah, I mean, he could be like top 20 in catchers and plate appearances next year. Like that type of thing is in play for him, just given how barren it is there in Chicago.
Yeah, Quero, I mean, he's probably the cheaper option here. Much cheaper, probably, just given the team context, to the buzz around both of them. But yeah, Quero, definitely an easy top 100 prospect for me, and one that I do think makes a substantial impact as early as opening day. Okay,
Chris. Infield was a tough spot for me here for this exercise. We're going to do a middle infield, a corner infield, and then we'll close out with an outfield. So I'll throw it to you for middle infield. Where did you want to go here?
Middle infield was actually really hard, surprisingly. Like, I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, I feel like there should be way more shortstops than this.
Yeah.
I feel good about making an impact. And I didn't. It was like, okay, a lot of those younger guys, like, your DeVries or Walcott's, like, I don't see a substantial impact, at least early. Just Travis Bazzana come up early. I don't know. So I landed on an old friend who I feel like could be a buy low, and that's Jordan Lawlar. That was your pick too, huh?
Yeah. Well, we got there the same way. We got there through sort of like looking for a better option.
Process of elimination there, where it was like, okay, got to go with Lawlar, who has been, uninspiring. He's been hurt a lot. And I think that's really the concerning aspect, is the consistent injuries with Lawlar. And this year, he's obviously missed substantial time. He's played in just 19 games, including some time at the complex on rehab. But he's kind of put it all together in AAA now to close out the year. And things are looking much better, which is encouraging to me. Where's the thing with Lawlar? Like, we know the talent level. We know he's got a ton of power and speed. We saw it on display last year. And he even came up and had a brief cup of coffee in the majors. But, he had 20 home runs last year, stole 36 bases. You look and, that talent level is still within there. It's just, can he stay healthy for long enough to make that full season impact in Arizona? And I don't see a reason why he can't. He's come back so far in AAA, while it's just 40 plate appearances, has 2 homers and a steal, 353 average, and a 410 OBP. He's hitting the ball hard, which is encouraging to see, especially coming off an injury. The contact skills are still a bit of a question, and maybe it's just a timing thing getting that back right now. And hopefully that'll be the case. I think that Lawlar's probably a prime candidate to, break camp with the team, just given the fact that they want to get this guy up and starting. His service time has already started because he debuted last year. So you would think that if all goes well this offseason in spring, Lawlar's the opening day shortstop in Arizona. He's still just 22 years old, and he just turned 22 in July, and it feels like there's a lot of prospect fatigue on him. And I mean, there's reasons to be worried, just given the injuries and given some of the whiff issues that we have seen, over time. But I still think the talent level's here with the power and speed upside. So you look at a Jordan Lawlar, the cost is probably pretty diminished, just given the out of sight, out of mind kind of thing, given the fact that he's dealt with so many injuries. And I think that makes him a pretty good buy for 2025.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the prospect fatigue is definitely setting in with him. Every time I do an update to my prospect rankings, even if I just bump him down a couple spots, I still get people like, "Are you not worried about the injuries?" It's like, yeah, I'm worried about the injuries, of course. So I mean, there are people that I think would be eager to unload their Lawlar shares this offseason. So that upside is still there. The injury risk is heightened, and I think there is still a little bit of hit tool risk with Lawlar, but tough to find a middle infield prospect for 2025 that can match his power speed ceiling. So I'm gonna go with Adael Amador here. Obviously already made his big league debut earlier this year, sort of out of necessity with the Rockies there, but it was very short-lived. But he has been basically the player people were hoping he would be sort of in the second half at AA. And, the Rockies, I think the Rockies are still pretty into the idea of the Tovar Amador middle infield duo being their kind of middle infield duo of the future. And, with Tovar, he made his first full season in the big leagues at 20, I want to say. And Amador's 21. I wouldn't be surprised if he barely sees any time at AAA next year, and they just kind of get it rolling, especially if he's performing well in spring training. The power potential is not that great, but he does get to play in Coors. He has shown that strong hit tool here in the second half. He'll steal some bases. So I think people will look at that season line on Amador, and obviously he was terrible in the first couple months of the year, and they'll be kind of underwhelmed by that season line. But just the way that he's finished, the fact that he's already on the 40-man roster, the fact that it's just Brendan Rodgers standing in his way, I think we'll see Amador in the big leagues for at least a couple of months next year.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. I mean, given the fact that they brought him up this year and the situation they did where he was struggling, I don't see a reason why that they don't give him a fair shot next year, maybe even out of spring training. So it's probably a good buy low opportunity. He was really hyped last offseason. This offseason, probably not a lot of buzz. So it can create a pretty good buying opportunity on Amador.
Yeah, and I am still I'm not into the impact potential with Amador, but I do think there are things to like in 5x5 fantasy.
Yeah.
All right, corner infield. Are you going to go with a sleeper? Are you going to go with a high pedigree type of guy? There's a lot of different ways you could go here.
Yeah, and I feel like the corner spot always has some of those deep sleepers where you get a guy that, comes up and you don't expect a lot and they really pop off for power. I'm going with a recent draftee in Nick Kurtz, who the A's were pretty aggressive with prior to his injury, which is a concerning thing that he's dealt with so many injuries throughout his career. But, they sent Kurtz to AA, and he was really good. He's been really good to start his pro career. His college career was exceptional, and I think you can put it up with any of those guys that were drafted this year. And I'd actually take Kurtz. I'm 3 overall in FYPD rankings just because of how consistently good he's been. You look at the numbers and how he stacks up. I mean, power-wise, he stacks up with any of them. 111 mile-an-hour 9th percentile, which translated right over to near 110 with wood this year in a small sample. So we didn't see a big drop-off from metal to wood. The contact rates are extremely strong. with Kurtz. I mean, you look and, right there with any of them, 80% overall, 87% in zone, rarely chases out of the zone. He had a sub 14% chase rate in college, which was right with the elites in the class like Bazana and Weatherholt. He probably walks too much. I think Kurt's biggest flaw is how passive he really is and how many walks he takes. I mean, throughout his career, he walked 189 times in 784 plate appearances, struck out just 130 times in college, which pretty ridiculous. He did miss a little bit of time, in his junior and senior year, but still managed 24 home runs as a sophomore and then 22 as a junior. Career slash at Wake, 333, 510, 725. And the fact that he stepped right into pro ball and looked the part, he was making a ton of contact. He was hitting the ball extremely hard. I look at the A's situation. They're hopefully going to be playing in Sacramento. I know there's been some questions about that over the last week. Who knows what's going on in that situation? But you can put them in that park and all these hitters are going to feast. But I think Kurtz is a player that probably isn't hurt at all by any park he goes to, just given the power, the amount of contact, the amount of balls that he puts in play. I think that Nick Kurtz is probably, maybe you expect him to be up by midseason, but it also wouldn't shock me if he broke camp with his team. If you're in a new stadium, they want to kind of make a new mark. And, there's guys like Kurtz, there's other guys in the system that are pretty close to ready. And I think that they can make pretty sizable impact. And I think that Kurtz is that guy.
What do you think of Tyler Soderstrom? Because I think he's a good buy low too.
Yeah.
And I would assume he's like the opening day first baseman. But then they got Brent Rooker. And I'm with you. I think like Kurtz is certainly on a path to being up in the big leagues next summer. But how do you sort of see them making the pieces fit? Do you think they could try Rooker in a corner spot? Would they move Rooker? Do you think Soderstrom is just not a guy that's going to stand in anyone's way?
I like Soderstrom, and I think that he's actually made some strides this year. He's making more contact than ever. He's gotten some good power. And I know you look at the slash line, it's like, he's 217 average, 299 OBP, like whatever. But, the 85% zone contacts look pretty good. The overall contact rates jumped a pretty decent amount. He's chasing less. And we know there's juice in the bat too. We've seen that. Yeah. And he's shown it in both AAA and the majors this year. I think it's an interesting, to figure out how the pieces work here. And I'm kind of curious. I wouldn't be shocked if they traded Rooker. He's got 3 years of control left, and he could warrant a massive return, which I guess on the flip side is another reason not to trade him, given the fact that he's not a free agent till 2028, but the A's could get a pretty substantial return. They could certainly address this rotation, and with a trade of Rooker and get a frontline guy for this rotation is
what they would do though. They would get like 4 number 5 starters.
Yeah, that's what they've done. They've historically traded with the Braves, and they've gotten like all these guys that could be number 5s. And right now you've got just Joey Estes of that group in the rotation. So yeah, I mean, who knows how this shakes out? And I think that's the biggest question mark because Soderstrom is the first baseman. He's not catching, and then you've got Rooker DHing. Could he play a corner spot? I don't know. The outfield's all of a sudden, it looks a little crowded in Oakland, just given some of the emergence of like Lawrence Butler and JJ Bleday and someone that's on the cusp of debuting too. It's a tricky spot to like say the Athletics have a kind of log jam right now, but they kind of do.
It's a fun, like, it's not a team you would shy away from like watching a game of anymore. Like there's a lot of interesting young players. Not that many interesting pitchers, but Soderstrom is still just 22, and he had a 140 WRC plus at AAA this year, obviously in the PCL. I mean, I like Kurtz. The health track record with Kurtz is really the only knock there. He has missed a decent amount of time, but he had probably the most impressive debut. I guess I can't remember exactly when Cam Smith started going off versus when Kurtz got hurt, but just a really good debut. And so, I think we see him kind of on a similar timeline as like Jacob Wilson this year. So for my corner infield, I'm just going to go with Coby Mayo. I think the 50% strikeout rate in the big leagues is really going to do a good job of keeping the price in a good range sort of all off season. And I think it could play out similarly to like Colton Cowser last year, where, you don't necessarily think about him as a guy that's going to win an everyday job until he does it in spring training. And then all of a sudden he's just spent the whole year as a regular. I think that could happen with Mayo next year. And I think the club is still very, very high on him. It's been a really, really small sample. He hasn't been playing consistently. And I like the idea of just buying sort of a blue chip prospect coming off of their first taste of the big leagues where they struggled, because you just know that they're going to kind of do what they need to do in the off season, really come to spring training with something to prove. So Mayo, also just 22 years old still, and he'll be eligible at third base. I think he spends most, if not all, next year in the big leagues. So I think it's a good offseason to buy low on Coby Mayo.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how quick people are to write off a top prospect that comes up and has 42 major league plate appearances. And Mayo has done all the right things this year. He's shown improvements with contact. Obviously hits the ball incredibly hard. I'm not worried a bit about Mayo long term. I look at everything under the hood and what he's done in AAA, and it's just highly impressive. And I think you're right. I think the struggles are good that he had in the majors, because now it creates an opportunity for him to go work harder to earn his spot and then to come back. And I think he could, take that third base spot and run with it. Who knows? Maybe even first base. It'd be kind of interesting to see where he lands, but I do think there's a spot in this lineup for him come opening day, and there's plenty of power impact to be had with Coby Mayo.
Yeah, and I actually think he's going to play first base. So that's a good point. Like for draft and hold leagues, he'll be eligible at third base now. I think he will add first base in season. So just a good, like I like kind of like starring guys like that when I'm drafting, is sort of like he's not eligible here, but if I'm really in a pinch at first base, I know maybe Coby Mayo adds that eligibility. So yeah, I mean, I think like you have Westberg, Mayo, Holiday, Henderson. I think that is their sort of dream 4-man infield there, with Adley, obviously. We'll see if it's, I know Holiday's not playing regularly anymore, and it's possible all 4 of those guys won't all be ready at the same time at the beginning of next year. But I mean, Mayo is just, he's such a prolific producer, and he's always been young for the level. I just think there's a lot to like there. Honorable mention for me at corner infield. I considered going with Matt Shaw. He's closed the year really strong, and he'll be eligible at third base next year, just based on that being where he played the most in the minors this year. I could see them moving or exploring moving like a Nico Horner this offseason, something like that. Maybe making way for Shaw over at second base, but I do think Shaw's pretty much done what he needs to do in the upper levels. And it's just a matter of kind of finding room for him. So I would expect him to be up with the Cubs in the first half next year.
Yeah, no, I agree. It wouldn't shock me if he's breaks camp with the team, just depending on what they do with Nico Horner. But I think that's a real opportunity for them to trade him.
Okay, so outfield is our final position to cover here. A lot of different directions you could go here, and something that kind of became clear to me during this process is there are just endless amounts of outfield and starting pitching and catching prospects to be interested in, but infielders are tough to find. What'd you end up doing with your outfield pick here?
I mean, I think the obvious answer would be Roman Anthony, but I do think his stock is probably going to be too high for me to want to draft. I could see him, especially now, BA's number 1 prospect. Like he could go top 150 and it wouldn't shock me, just given the year he had. So
do you think he kind of goes, is he going to go sort of like around like where Wyatt Langford was going? Like it's like, who's like a prospect comp from this year in terms of like ADP where he's sort of in that range? Maybe like Holiday was kind of going like early 200s, I think.
Yeah, I could certainly see that. Let's look back at, Langford ended up at 122, but part of me wonders, like, there was some late drafts where he was obviously pushed up after he was going to.
He was kind of Langford was kind of in the 150 range, I think, for most of draft season.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I think he lands. I mean, 150 to 200. Holiday was 188 ADP last year, so maybe in that range, it wouldn't shock me. Holiday, I mean, it would. I always think that Anthony's older than he is, but he's like a young 20, so it's like, okay, kind of comp similarly to age-wise with the promotions to Holiday, and I think that range is fair, 150 to 175. We'll see.
I think him and Holiday are buddies, I think.
Yeah, they work out together and stuff.
Now, so I kind of interrupted you. You were not going to go Anthony. I just wanted to sort of give the listeners an idea of sort of where we think he might go and versus why we might not be picking him here.
Yeah, and I don't hate that range. Like, I wouldn't hate it if it was 150 to 175. I'd certainly want to get a share in case he just like took off. But I kind of alluded to this earlier with the Kurtz conversation, but there's an outfielder here in Colby Thomas who is more than ready to crack this major league roster. And Thomas might end up being the best of those outfielders, just given the power and speed upside that he has. It's been an absolute insane year for Thomas, who has 79 extra base hits to this point, which is absurd. Last year, he had 63 and was at the top of the minors. He's at 79, 30 home runs, 44 doubles, and 5 triples for Colby Thomas this year between double and triple A, slashing 273, 339, 565. It's good for a 900 plus OPS. The move to triple A hasn't phased him at all. He's continued to run consistent exit velocities, contact rates, chase rates. And sure, that's the biggest knock on Thomas, is that he does chase a little bit more than you'd like to see. He's running chase rate 34% this year, which is a little higher than I typically like in a prospect. But I do think he can get away with it in the fact that he makes a lot of end zone contact. That's kind of where he makes up for it. The end zone contact rate hovered around 80% all year, has gone down a bit in AAA, closer to 78%. But I still think he can make it work because the quality of contact is so good. It's consistent angles. He puts the ball in the air often. He can really get to that pull side power, but he can also go oppo. Hit a home run the other day to the opposite field. The power's legit. It's a 107 mile an hour, 90th percentile, which is upper tier. The average EV being really good too, closer to 89. I just look at this profile and I think that he's ready to make that impact. And maybe I thought it might be down the stretch this year. At this point, maybe not, just given their situation. But I think Colby Thomas is going to make a huge impact for the Athletics next year. And I think he's kind of the one that's not going to be valued like you think, and you get a pretty good deal on. And I'm willing to take that shot in late 20 rounds, especially if he goes post 30. I'm going to grab him wherever I can. But I think Thomas is just a prime buy candidate right now for maybe even Dynasty and keeper leagues and DC formats.
Yeah, you sniped me again. For that Thomas and Rushing, or the 2 times you sniped me. Thomas, I think everything you said is dead on there. Really pretty exciting that in sometime early next season it'll be Thomas, Butler, and Bleday as the outfield trio in Oakland. It's going to be a fun lineup. Thomas, I think the batting average, he's not going to be a positive next year, but just as long as he does enough to play, he'll get the power and the speed. Okay, so I will pivot to Jacob Melton of the Astros. They've been kind of searching for some everyday outfielders, and guys have been given opportunities, and guys haven't really taken the jobs and run with them. I thought Jake Myers was kind of establishing himself as their center fielder, but he's really cooled off over the past month or two. And like Mauricio Dubon's been playing center field pretty regularly. Jacob Melton is a really good defensive outfielder. So I think that's important to mention first kind of in terms of how it factors into his playing time. I think that probably buys him an opportunity earlier than he otherwise would get. And if he just kind of keeps his head above water at the plate, I think he will hang on to an everyday job for a good chunk of next year. There's speed. So, I mean, with all these outfielders I was kind of considering, I didn't really expect them to be positives in batting average. And I don't expect Melton to be a positive in batting average next year as a rookie, but he's got 30 steals, 14 homers this year in about 100 games at AA and AAA. So he could get you 20 steals in the big leagues next year. And he's got more power than he showed so far at AAA. Obviously was shown that at AA, but you could get like kind of like a Parker Meadows type of like output maybe from Melton in the second half next year. Like, I don't think that's crazy.
I love Melton. I love that call too. I actually wrote him up last week as somebody that I thought could break camp with the Astros, just given the fact that situation, as you mentioned, and Melton's still been good. It's funny. People have kind of completely jumped off that train. And yeah, I mean, if you look at the slash line, it's been mid, but
I wasn't even, I've jumped on the train recently.
Yeah.
I was off the train. And then I was like, actually, like it was kind of the defense that sort of swung me. I was just sort of like, the defense is just going to get him playing time. Yeah.
And he's really solid in center field. I saw him last year when he was with Asheville. I mean, he's got good reads, good jumps. And, does he play center field? I don't know, but he's more than capable of it. And certainly if you put him in a corner, he's going to be really good. The bat's going to play. As you mentioned, there's more power than he's shown. The exit velocities are, in the plus range. So 14 home runs, you certainly could get to much more than that, as he had 23 last year with 46 stolen bases. So I love the call on Melton. I think that, hopefully he goes late enough where he becomes a great target. Certainly not the buzz that Colby Thomas has. And I think Melton creates a really good buying opportunity.
So, Chris, before we wrap up, I just wanted to get your thoughts on some Blue Jays hitting prospects, because there were a couple of Blue Jays that I like almost picked for a few of these spots, but I just was like, I don't know if I love them that much, and they've got all these guys. But like, where are you at on someone like Jonathan Clase with Toronto? Like, they obviously has not performed well since they trade for him, but like his price is going to be really low. They obviously targeted him. He's got speed. Like, are you interested in Clase at all? Are you interested in RJ Schreck, whatever he's become since they acquired him? Like, do you have any interest in like Will Wagner or Elvis Martinez next year? I see this Blue Jays farm system grouping of guys. Alan Rodens even had a really good run in left field at AAA for them. Like, are you interested in any of these guys, or do they all just kind of like cancel each other out and take away your interest?
That's a good question, is like, how does this lineup shake out next year? I think the one thing we can be certain of is that Vlad will be in the lineup next year. It feels like he's the lock for sure. Springer should be. I mean, he's under contract through 2027, but he hurt all the time, so you just never know what you're going to get. Bo, do they trade him? I don't know. It'd be kind of interesting to see, but yeah, I feel like very few of these lineup spots are actually locked down. I like Will Wagner a lot. For fantasy, or for roto leagues, I'll say, how much does he provide? Because, while he makes a lot of contact and he hits the ball hard, he's going to get on base. It's a lot of balls into the ground, which does give me a little bit of pause. But I do think there's some intrigue with Wagner if you're in like a points league. Now, Clase is kind of interesting because I actually think that while the surface numbers haven't looked great this year, he's actually made some kind of notable improvements under the hood. He's hitting the ball a little bit harder on the higher end. He's topped out at 110 mile an hour max EV, a ninth percentile around 102, which is not bad for somebody, that has, not a ton of power. And he's actually made a little bit more contact this year while chasing less. So while the surface line is not great with Clase, I do think it's an interesting buy, just given the fact that, he does provide stolen bases. And if he gets in this lineup and you get him very late in DC, it's like, okay, maybe there's some intrigue with a little bit of power and some stolen bases. The fact that he did come up and, he wasn't very good at all in his debut probably helps the value. Shrek's interesting. I think that he has a little bit of intrigue too. 9th rounder out of Vanderbilt last year. And, it's not a profile that I think people expected to really pop off. And he's just been good. He's been consistently good all year. And he's kind of shown that, maybe there is something here. And I looked back at his numbers at Vanderbilt, and the underline was always really good with really low chase rates, plus contact, and, average to slightly better exit velocities. And this year, 17 homers, 29 doubles, and a 388 OBP. That'll absolutely play when you put an OPS of 850 up. And yeah, you look, and obviously came over. He had some struggles in Arkansas, which is Seattle's AA, before he was traded to Toronto. But Arkansas is a terrible place to hit. Like, just go look at like the splits of like a Cole Young, and they're really bad, like home road splits. And I think that Arkansas just being a tough place to hit, hurt him for the little bit he was there. Since going over to New Hampshire, he's got back on track. 899 OPS, 5 homers, 8 doubles in 28 games. So, yeah, I mean, certainly the fact that he's 24, you could see him factor into this equation in the outfield. It's just, how does this all shake out? And I really have no clue with where they're going with this lineup. And it'll be interesting to see what kind of offseason moves that they make. But I think you could see a pretty different looking lineup in Toronto come next year.
Yeah, Shrek, in some ways kind of reminds me a little bit of like Kerry Carpenter, the prospect, just in terms of like the age, and it takes people forever to kind of buy in when you're 24, even if you're putting up big time numbers like that. But yeah, like Will Wagner is going to be eligible at second base next year, and he could add first base maybe in season, or third base or something. And I like Will Wagner a lot too. I kind of came back to the same thing you did. Like, if there's no speed, and the playing time's TBD, and the bat path isn't optimized for power, it's just kind of like, what I got to see what the price is. But I do like Will Wagner, the hitter. And then you got like Relvis Martinez, and like Ronnie Mauricio is another guy that we didn't talk about, but he'll be back next year. I'm excited. I'm excited for 2025 drafts already. I really appreciate you helping me with this, Chris. Did you have any final thoughts at all?
No, it was just interesting. The infield was kind of eye-opening to me, as you kind of alluded to. Actually, the Mauricio call I think is really good. I think that obviously missing all year, he will create a really good buy-in opportunity for himself, just the out of sight, out of mind. And I think that he probably slots right in at second base for them next year. Maybe play some third. I know Vientos is obviously, kind of cemented himself there, but they're running Jose Iglesias out at second base. So Mauricio should have no problem taking that spot on opening day. And there's a lot of power, speed, and intrigue too with him. So I think Mauricio is a good call out there in a kind of a weaker infield class for next year.
It is. It's a really weak infield class. And like you said, with like the shortstops, it's like, do we want to talk about Nacho Alvarez? Like, it's really like, there's not a lot to look at in terms of shortstop prospects for 2025 value. Well, this has been awesome, Chris. Why don't you let people know where they can find your work?
Sure. Well, I appreciate you having me. Always enjoy podding with you. But you can find me on Twitter, Roto Clegg, Clegg, or the dynastydugout.com. All my work's there pretty much every day. The Toolshed Pod as well. And be sure to subscribe to RotoWire if you're not. If you're listening and not, I'm not sure why you wouldn't be, but subscribe to all the great work they do, and support James and all the cast over there.
Yeah, definitely support me, support RotoWire. Really appreciate that. This has been the RotoWire Prospect Podcast, brought to you by Pick 6, the new fantasy game from DraftKings. Use code RWPicks for $50 in Pick 6 credits with a $5 deposit.